Hello everyone, welcome to another tasting of the Cup Tasters membership. Today I have a special guest, Nick, who is joining us from Passenger's retail team. Thanks so much for joining us for this month. As you can see from our slightly improvised craft packaging here on my right, we've got an extra special surprise to taste today, and I'm excited to share a little bit more. So both of the coffees that I've chosen for this final month of the Cup Tasters tasting membership come from the East African nation of Burundi. And I chose these coffees for two reasons. The first reason is that I just personally really love Burundian coffees. And the second reason is I thought that it would be kind of fun to have a bit of a throwback to our first month of the tasting membership in January, when we tasted two different processes from work at Chalbessa. So just like that tasting box, today we have two coffees, a wet process coffee and a dry process coffee, that gives us an opportunity to compare the impact of processing when comparatively tasting two coffees from the same place. So both of these coffees were produced by the Long Miles Coffee Project, which was founded by an American couple, Ben and Kristy Carlsen, and serves as an innovative and inspiring point of connection between smallholder farmers in rural Burundi and coffee roasting companies throughout the international specialty market. Passenger has purchased the vast majority of our Burundian coffees from Long Miles for a number of years running. And our first coffee, Haza, is one of Passenger's year-round foundational offerings. I really wanted Haza to be our first coffee of this tasting because I think it really serves as the perfect baseline. It's truly the epitome of what we look for in terms of a classic wet processed flavor profile from this part of the world. The second coffee in your tasting box is a dry process lot that you're getting an exclusive first taste of. This is a coffee that we're going to add to Passenger's menu in the coming weeks. So the smallest geopolitical division in the country of Burundi is called a colline. Colline is French for hill, and every specific microlot that Long Miles produces is kept separated by hill. So what does that mean? That specifically means that every lot, every individual coffee that Passenger buys from Long Miles is specifically traceable to the specific hill where that coffee was harvested. So this particular coffee, with its amazing custom label, was harvested on Gaharo Hill, hence the fact that this coffee is called Gaharo Dry Process. So our cups are cooling. We're getting pretty close to the point where we can start tasting. And I thought for our tasting today, we could sort of focus on two very specific tasting categories or sensory categories, specifically sweetness and body. So sweetness is pretty self-explanatory, and we've been talking about sweetness all the way through the Cup Taster season. But what do we mean by body when we're describing a coffee? So in coffee tasting, I generally think of body as a tactile descriptor, meaning when we describe the body of a coffee, we're talking about how that coffee feels to the palate. So is the body of the coffee kind of heavier and more full? Or is it lighter and more juicy? Another way of thinking about it is to compare it to other beverages that we might be familiar with. So when you're tasting a particular coffee and trying to analyze its body, do you have a tactile sensation that is more reminiscent of heavy cream? Or is it more reminiscent of skim milk or even tea? So I think that it'll be fun, specifically with these two coffees from the same place that are processed in completely different ways, to not only focus on differences in sweetness that we perceive between coffee one and coffee two, but also kind of focus a little bit on body. I think that it's not necessarily always the area that people in specialty coffee really focus on, but I think with this pairing in particular, it could be a lot of fun. Great, so I'm really excited to taste these. I think they're at a perfect temperature. So why don't we start with the Haza here. Should have given you your own little hot water cup there. So maybe as we're tasting these, let's focus first on the sweetness. So when I taste this, it's got really great sweetness, but it's very much balanced. Like there's also kind of a bittersweet black tea thing happening that keeps this from being off the charts sweet. There's just, for me at least, like a very, very nice balance of like sweetness, some bittersweet notes. What do you think? How would you describe the sweetness of that one?
Yeah, I would say I get a lot of the same things. That black tea really comes through as a nice kind of balancing act of that sweetness that I taste at the beginning. Yeah, there's a nice acidity to it as well that kind of runs through the sweetness. So yeah, that idea of balance that you talked about before, I definitely pick up with the Heza for sure.
So one of the things that I didn't really describe earlier when I was introducing these coffees is, this particular coffee is named for the washing station. So Long Miles has 3 sites, and Heza is one of the washing stations that they operate. And as opposed to this coffee, which is named for the hill where it comes from, Gaharo, this, we named it after Heza because we knew that we wanted to source a coffee from that particular team and that particular washing station every year. But we knew that multiple hills delivered to that washing station. So depending on the year, it might come from one hill or another hill, etc. So this particular harvest, which is fairly recently arrived, comes from Konge Hill. And I think what's really, really fascinating in my ongoing conversations with the Long Miles team is what they have observed from cupping hundreds and thousands of, individual microlots from this particular region of Burundi, is that a fascinating thing about the sort of hill system of sourcing and keeping coffees traceable is that some of the hills have their own microclimates, which means that some of the hills really, even though they're so tiny in terms of surface area, truly have their own flavor profiles. So it's always interesting when you change a little bit hill to hill year after year to kind of get slightly different flavor profiles. It's usually always a sweetness that's very brown sugary and molassesy and maybe a little bit of red fruit in the mix. But I would say particularly like this lot from Konge Hill, since we've been roasting it, I just think it is like impeccably balanced, and it has that really lovely kind of interplay between brown sugar sweetness and then kind of bittersweet black tea notes, which I just really love. Why don't we move to this second coffee here and see how the sweetness hits us? What do you think? What's the like first thing that pops in your mind when you sip that and you think about sweetness?
There's a lot of sweetness in there. There's a lot of sweetness in there.
Intensely sweet, right? So the
intensely
concentration of sweetness is like off the charts compared to this one. I mean, there's so much sweetness here, but sweetness just like really gets your attention right away. And immediately, like some of the notes that I think about, like this to me comparatively has so much more chocolate going on. Like I get creamy milk chocolate with this cup, but also like really rich red fruit, like berry jam kind of situation going on, right?
Yeah, definitely a very like ripe berry, a very ripe, I'm not sure if I can place what berry specifically, but it's definitely like a ripe red berry sweetness.
Yeah, I feel like all the berries got together and made a jam and it's right there. Along with like a lot of cherry as well, which I really enjoy. But that base of chocolate, as opposed to over here, I feel like you have kind of clarity and the citrus that you were talking about. It's a little bit zippier, and you also kind of have a sweetness that's like milder, more in balance, and maybe a little more brown sugary.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there.
Nice. So why don't we return to this and think once again about body, right? So I think there's a little bit of a contrast here, not only sweetness, but also kind of body. So going back to that kind of idea of what words would we use to sort of describe how this coffee feels on the palate? What do you think?
I know we said it for the sweetness aspect, but I think when you think about the mouthfeel of more, I would say, think more like black tea. The Heza really shines with that type of type of mouthfeel when I drink it, for sure.
100%. And I think that it's really true that a lot of times we will have descriptors when we're kind of evaluating coffee that apply to multiple categories, right? So for me, this coffee is absolutely kind of delivering black tea qualities, not only as a flavor note, but also as a descriptor of body. So it tastes like black tea, but it also feels like black tea. It's tea-like in body. I think another way of putting it comparatively is, as we move to coffee number 2, in terms of how I would understand and describe body, this is a heavier bodied coffee, right? There's more of a like pleasant weight to the coffee on your palate compared to this. So lighter bodied, heavier bodied. Also, I think we could use descriptors, once again, connecting with some of those sweetness descriptors that would tie in as well. So for me, there's a sweetness that's reminiscent of milk chocolate. Milk chocolate is also creamy, right? And I think the body of this coffee is very creamy in a very pleasant way, whereas a similar descriptor over here would be a bit juicier. Is that kind of aligned with your experience?
Yeah, 100%. I for sure think, creamy is the first kind of descriptor that comes to mind when I taste this coffee over here. And this coffee, just as you said, Evan, is definitely a lot more on the juicy side, whereas this coffee is definitely a little bit creamier.
Totally agree. Seems like we're quite calibrated on these two coffees. So, I mean, I think once again, to kind of review, we won't go into all the details of the differences between processing approach here. And for anyone who's kind of watching the video that needs a little bit of a review, definitely go back and check out the first video that we did for January for the Worka Chalbessa coffees, because I think we did a pretty good overview of the difference between wet processed coffee and dry processed coffee. But traditionally, Passenger has not had too many coffees in the dry process category kind of on the menu. And the reason for that is, especially a few years ago, it was really, really hard to find a coffee that was processed in this way that to us seemed perfectly clean. Because of that processing approach where the coffee is sort of left in cherry throughout the drying process, if that sort of drying process is not managed with a lot of skill and attention, you can unfortunately not only have these like incredible fruity jammy flavors, but also sometimes some off flavors, or what to us at least present as off flavors, which can be a little bit fermenty or a little bit boozy in an unpleasant way. What's really cool about this coffee, and is really a testament to like how amazing the team at Long Miles is, and the attention to detail that they apply to every aspect of processing at their sites, is how incredibly clean this is, given how also heavily fruited it is. So this is the type of coffee where when this sample arrived, it completely destroyed my preconceived notions of the type of coffee that I was prepared to enjoy, in the sense that it's so clean, but it's also just like a fruit bomb in every way, shape, or form. So really, really love this contrast, and really felt that these coffees not only show the range and achievement of these amazing farmers and this amazing team at the Long Miles Coffee Project, but also that tasting them would give us an opportunity to compare and contrast these sensory qualities of sweetness and body. Any other kind of thoughts that you have from tasting these? Do you have a favorite?
I mean, this has kind of been one of my go-tos over the years of drinking Passenger coffee.
Yeah.
And one of the ways I always kind of described the Heza was a little bit of like a raspberry jam quality to it. And I think after I taste that's the number one thing that I would say. It's that, there's that kind of ramp up of body, but you keep the cleanliness that you get from the Heza here. This kind of blew me away.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Well, I love that you brought that up as well, because I do think tasting this, that clarifies, like, I get a subtle fresh raspberry note here.
Yeah.
But it's almost like you took that note and then just dialed it up to 100 in this particular coffee, and then kind of served it with a nice chocolate bar as well.
100%.
So I'm really excited for everyone in the membership to taste these two coffees. I think that's going to wrap up our tasting for this month. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us for this 6 months of comparative tasting. And we'll definitely keep you updated regarding potential plans for the membership down the road. But for now, please send us your feedback as always to members@passengercoffee.com. Let us know what you thought of the coffees, send us your tasting notes, and thanks so much. Enjoy the coffees.